the thing that I really wish I learned in sex education is, broadly speaking, how the patriarchy shows up in our intimate relationships, and what are the implications of that, and what do I do about that.
Today we're talking with Pierce Delahunt, who's been a longtime friend of My Sex Bio, as well as a My Sex Bio studio facilitator for Fucking Capitalism class, where we discuss how political economy intersects with sexuality. Pierce, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so what you're doing when you do this is starting to bring these concepts to kids. So basically, I guess one of the outcomes of teaching this to young people is kind of starting to, dismantle the power structures that are around that are not benefiting society in general, and especially certain groups of people.
Totally. Yeah. I would say, in my teaching work, it's more about bringing that awareness. And then, of course, I would support them in dismantling those oppressive structures. But that's not necessarily the work I'm doing in the classroom, right? I have dabbled with organizing and direct action kind of things, but my primary form of work is teaching. And so in that way, I'm more trying to bring a lens to people so that they can begin to look at, with more awareness and critical reflection, these power structures and systems, especially the collective systems and how those things operate, as well as the power structures, and having those two things in place, which I find are so overlooked and undervalued in these conversations.
I agree. Totally agree. All right. So one of the little topics that we want to kind of touch on a little bit today is the intersection between sex education and the education system. So I want to start by exploring what your experience has been with the education system. Maybe starting by asking you what's something that you wish you had learned at school when it comes to sex education, relationships, and emotions. Because it's important to mention that we know now that sex education is not only about anatomy, right? So like part of learning how to have right relationships is also part of sex ed. So yeah, what's something you wish you had learned at school when it comes to sex ed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say, I myself have definitely had more experience in the education system as a whole than I have had with sex education. My experience with sex education is entirely limited to my own sex education that I received as a student. And I can talk about those things as well. But yeah, the thing that I really wish I learned in sex education is, broadly speaking, how the patriarchy shows up in our intimate relationship, and what are the implications of that, and what do I do about that. And there are a lot of things that come from that, including in my sex education that I received, which started in 5th grade, and where sex education starts is a whole other thing. But for me, it started in 5th grade, and they divided the, presumed to be boys and the presumed to be girls. And they basically gave us an anatomy lesson, which is very valuable. I think that's important to know. And that's so limited and narrow. And also, I think we can talk about the merits of dividing the presumed to be boys and the presumed to be girls as one thing, but also the presumed to be boys never got the anatomy class about AFAB bodies, and the presumed to be girls never got the anatomy class about the AMAB bodies. Of course, typically, women are far more aware of the anatomy of men than men are about the anatomy of women. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, it took me a long time to recover from just never having that education myself. So that's just that level. But then I think bigger than that is, exploring my own relationship to gender, my own relationship to sexuality, and those things. And then past my own relationship to those things with myself, there's, okay, now I'm in a relationship with someone else, and I'm a white man, and I'm attracted. I would identify as hetero-flexible. So most of the people that I'm going to be with are going to be women or AFAB folk. And okay, now there's a power differential. And what does that mean for my relationships, and how do I honor the conversations that happen while there's a power differential. If I could pick one like really important lesson on that front, then I would say the thing that I wish that I learned in sex ed is the fulfillment that I get, that I can also offer, that the mutual fulfillment that I get in relationship with someone when I actively, not just like wait to be told, but actively support their boundaries, the boundaries of my partner, and ask what those are, and want to learn what they are, and I'm excited to honor them, and the practice that gives me in being sensitive to when I might be encroaching on someone's boundary. I wish I had that, because I have, I've lived entirely too long without that practice, and I'm, as a result, not as sensitive to other people's boundaries as I would love to be if I had a lifetime of practice behind me. And that means I have fucked up, and I hate that, and I have a lot of feelings about that. But that is the most fundamental thing for me on a personal level of what I wish I learned in sex ed. And I think that that's something that's especially important in general for most cis men and boys, and to be exploring and to be taught and practice.
That's important, because I think part of the narrative of we could call it masculinity, but I'm not sure if that would be the right exact word. But it's that of like this whole play of like, if she says no, it's because she's just playing hard to get, and she's probably more interested. Like there is a lot of confusion around that we pick up from, like the media, people around us, just the wrong places. So I think that's very important, because it's like one of the many things often overlooked, like, oh, you should just know, but like, wait, what if I don't?
Absolutely.
And I like that you mentioned that you call them presumed to be girls and presumed to be boys. That's great, because that's another whole conversation. Like, you don't know if those presumed to be boys are gonna end up being intimate and in relationships with other presumed to be boys. So like, like the whole purpose of separating, etc., etc., it just makes no sense.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to ask you specifically, so in your experience, personal experience, you don't need to talk as, like it's not a professional opinion, but in your personal experience. So what's the answer to those things? Because at the beginning of the answer, you told me, I would like to know, I would have liked to be told how patriarchy shows up in our relationships and the implications that has. So how does it show up? How have you learned it shows up? And what are the implications of that?
That's an excellent question. Getting at that, so the framework that I would offer in going into that is, I identify personally capitalism to be foundational oppressive system. And I want to be clear when I say that I don't mean that capitalism is the worst one or is somehow morally more objectionable than racism or sexism or other forms of oppression. What I mean by foundationally oppressive is that capitalism is the system that materially empowers other oppressive systems. So James Baldwin has a lot of really excellent things that he says, but one of them is that, if this is James Baldwin talking, not me, but if a man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If a man can lynch me and suffer no consequences, that's my problem. And in that sense, we can see how capitalism materially empowers racism, because it is the system that decides how to distribute wealth, or whatever political economy we're in is the system that decides how to distribute wealth. And one way to understand wealth is material power. So capitalism decides to distribute material power or wealth based on extraction and transactionality. So, at the first stage of that, we have what's called primary accumulation, or also called primitive accumulation. I prefer the translation primary accumulation. But land theft is one big example of that. Not the only one, but the theft of the entire continent of Turtle Island, for example, is what allows them to say, okay, now we own the land, not you anymore. It's not held in common. Now I personally own the land, and if you want to live on it, now you have to pay me. And that creates the demand for this thing that we call money, and now you have to pay me. And so given that system where, the capitalist is backed by the state, and that system then being called capitalism, and that system having materially empowered what we today call white people at the expense of BIPOC folk, then BIPOC folk especially, then that's how capitalism, that's one way that capitalism empowers racism. And one way that capitalism empowers the patriarchy, sexism, is by giving more material power to men at the expense of women and genderqueer folk. And so, given then that we have this model that says, okay, I'm going to be extracting as much as I can, right, from people, and I want to, everything is a transaction. Every gift that I give becomes a liability, and everything that I can take from someone becomes an asset. And capitalism actively rewards that, where we praise people who accumulate billions of dollars as though that's somehow noble, where, like, most people, I know I'm getting rambling now, but most people, when they see like an unhoused person, I think our dominant culture has this idea that, like, we have a kind of pity for them. We think, oh, I'm so sorry you didn't make it, right? When I look at a billionaire, I think, oh my God, you didn't make it. You didn't realize that accumulating millions of dollars is not worth your time and effort, and that you could have been honoring people and supporting people, and instead you chose to steal their labor at such magnitude that you've accumulated billions of dollars. I feel so sorry. I also feel a lot of other things, but one of them. But so yeah, so we then internalize the value of extraction from people, such that then in a relationship, what do we want? We want to get everything we can out of the person. And one of the things that we can get out of people is sex. And that, spinning off of the James Baldwin quotation, it's one thing to want to get sex from someone, it's another thing to take it from them, and then it's another thing to be able to take it from them without consequence. And we've had entirely too many centuries of people being able to take sex from other people without experiencing any consequences, and that the system that has allowed that is materially empowered by so that's one way that capitalism works with the patriarchy and sexism, and works with those interpersonal relationships, where then we internalize the value of extracting from other people, rather than understanding and internalizing the joy of honoring another person's personhood, which is so much more fulfilling. Another big thing I think that is missing from sex ed specifically, but just our whole system in general, like the whole fucking world, and including education broadly, is accountability, right? Like, there's so much emphasis on bringing consent into sex ed, as there should be, and often that even when we get consent brought into the conversation about consent is make sure you have consent, which is important, and express it that you are offering your consent or not. But often we don't have the conversation, what happens when consent is violated? What does accountability look like? And that the way we've compartmentalized and siloed these things, like, maybe that would be in a complementary restorative justice class and go into more depth, but that does need to be in a sex ed class. I think we have to have those conversations that, yeah, there are boundaries, and sometimes those boundaries aren't binary. It's not always super clear. Like,
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, that like there are some boundaries that are very delineated, and then there are some boundaries that are softer or more flexible, or there's more negotiable boundaries, and people can get into miscommunications, and that happens. And what does accountability look like for those? And what does accountability look like when you have a very clear boundary violation? What if you're the person whose boundaries were violated? I think that should be a conversation in sex ed. And what if you were a person who violated those boundaries? I think that should be a conversation in sex ed. And what if you want a relationship with the other person to continue? And what if you don't want a relationship with the other person to continue? What do those things look like? I think those are all really important conversations to be had.
Well, I will say that Pierce, collaboration with us, well, he has written an article that is on our website, and you can find it at mysexbio.org/blog. It's called "What Does Sex Have to Do with Socialism?" Very interesting article. Definitely go check it out. And we also have video series of the lectures that he's put together for fucking capitalism, where you're gonna start exploring a lot what all these concepts mean, just like what we did today, which was, analyzing how the systemic issues intersect with sexuality and with sex ed. He does that with a lot of other different specific topics. He's very passionate about this, so definitely go check out the videos. Also, you can find it on youtube.com/mysexbio. And is there anything that you want to promote, anything you're working on, anything you want to let people know?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity and for the plugs and praise. Yeah, you can find me on all the social media things. You can search my name, Pierce Delahunt, or my handle on any of them: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Linktree, Medium. All that is Dela Pierce. That's DELAPIERCED. So check me out there. This summer has been a whole ride, including a summer camp where I was going to teach that got canceled. But when the school year starts, I'm excited to be teaching again. If anyone needs some lessons, I'm happy to come in physically or remotely. I'm personally in the Bay Area of Northern California, but I do online talks too, and just if you want to reach out and talk about this stuff, I've got resources I can share with you too. You're right. I am passionate about it, and I love having these conversations. So.
Okay, there you have it, everyone. This was Pierce Delahunt on Sex Talks with Diana. Thank you so much for being here.